Okay, so you want to own a shipping agency. A ship arrives at your port, you handle the paperwork, coordinate the pilots and tugboats, clear customs, and collect a fee for making sure everything runs smoothly. Sounds like one of the safest middleman businesses on earth. Ships need to dock somewhere, and someone local has to handle it. But here's the strange part. To do this job properly, you often have to pay the port, the pilots, and the suppliers out of your own pocket first, and trust that the shipping company that hired you pays you back later. That's not a minor detail. It's the entire risk model of this business, hiding in plain sight. And here's the part that should really give you pause. In 2016, the world's seventh largest container shipping line filed for bankruptcy overnight, with roughly $5.4 billion in debt. 60 of its ships were suddenly stranded at ports around the world, carrying an estimated $14.5 billion in cargo. Port operators everywhere refused to even let those ships dock, because nobody could guarantee anyone would get paid. Somewhere in that chaos were shipping agents who had already fronted real money on that company's behalf, now standing in line as unsecured creditors, hoping to get some of it back. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how a shipping agency actually makes money, why fronting other people's cash is the core of the business model, why an entire industry can freeze overnight when one major carrier collapses, and what it actually takes to build a real, defensible agency business. The three types of this business. Shipping agencies come in roughly three forms, and they carry very different levels of risk. The smallest and safest is a protective agency hired temporarily, often by a ship's insurer or charterer, purely to watch over that party's interests during a single port call, without taking on the financial responsibility of running the visit. Low risk, low reward, and a genuinely reasonable entry point for a new agency trying to build relationships without exposing much capital. The middle tier, and the most common, is a husbandry agency, the full-service role most people picture. You coordinate pilotage, tugboats, berth allocation, customs clearance, crew changes, provisions, and repairs for a vessel calling at your port, typically earning a flat agency fee per port call that can range from a few hundred to a few $1,000s depending on the port and vessel size. This is where the real business lies, and it's also where the financial exposure starts, because husbandry agents routinely pay port authorities, pilots, and suppliers directly, then bill the shipping line afterward through what's called a disbursement account. The top tier is a liner agency, an exclusive, long-term contract representing a major shipping line's interests across an entire region, handling everything from cargo bookings to container logistics on an ongoing basis rather than a single port call. This tier requires real capital and infrastructure, but it also produces the industry's most valuable, recurring revenue relationships, which is exactly why it's dominated by a small number of established global names. Industry consolidation has accelerated here. The top 5 port agency companies now account for roughly 38% of the entire market by revenue, with established players like Inchcape Shipping Services and Wilhelmsen using decades of regional relationships and scale to keep smaller independents locked out of the largest contracts. Here's the detail that catches almost every new agency owner off guard. Unlike most businesses on this channel, your biggest financial exposure isn't equipment or rent. It's the fact that you're often required to advance real cash to third parties, port authorities, pilots, tugboat operators, fuel suppliers before your own client has paid you a cent. Where the money actually comes from, and what it's riding on. A shipping agency makes money two ways. The first is the agency fee itself, your direct compensation for coordinating a port call, typically a fixed amount agreed in advance regardless of how complicated the visit turns out to be. The second, and far larger in dollar terms, is the disbursement account, the running total of every third-party cost you've paid on the shipping line's behalf, which you then invoice back to them, usually with your fee added on top. Here's the trick. On a single port call, your agency fee might be a modest $1,000 to $3,000. But the disbursement account behind it, port dues, pilotage, towage, stevedoring, freshwater, provisions, waste disposal, can easily run tens of thousands of dollars for a single vessel visit, and every dollar of that flows through your books before it flows back to you. You are, in effect, running a small trade finance operation bolted onto a logistics coordination job, extending real credit to shipping lines you're trusting to pay you back on schedule. Most of the time, This works exactly as designed. Shipping lines are large, established companies. Invoices get settled in 30 to 60 days, and the agency fee on top of the disbursement account is genuine, repeatable profit. But the entire model depends on one assumption holding true, that your client is still solvent by the time your invoice comes due. And in an industry defined by extreme freight rate volatility, container shipping rates have swung by hundreds of percent within a single 2 to 3 year window more than once this past decade. That assumption doesn't always hold. This is the part that breaks people's brains the same way a rigged casino game breaks a gambler's brain. You did nothing wrong. You coordinated the port call perfectly, paid every supplier on time, and delivered exactly what your client asked for. And you can still lose the money, because the risk in this business isn't operational. It's counterparty risk, sitting quietly underneath every single disbursement account you carry. Why even a massive, established carrier collapsing can wipe out agents overnight? You'd think that working with major, established shipping lines would fully insulate an agency from this risk. One case shows exactly how wrong that assumption can be. On August 31st, 2016, Hanjin Shipping, South Korea's largest container line and the 7th largest in the world, representing roughly 3% of all global container shipping capacity, filed for bankruptcy protection with around $5.4 billion in debt. The collapse came almost without warning to the wider market. Within days, 60 of Hanjin's ships were stranded at ports and anchorages around the world, carrying an estimated $14.5 billion worth of cargo. Port operators from Los Angeles to Singapore to Shanghai refused to let Hanjin vessels dock or unload, specifically because nobody could guarantee that pilots, tugboat crews, and stevedores would actually get paid for the work. For shipping agents who had been handling Hanjin's port calls, this wasn't an abstract industry news story. It was a direct financial crisis. Agents who had already advanced disbursement funds paid the port dues, paid the pilots, paid the local suppliers on Hanjin's behalf, suddenly found themselves as unsecured creditors in a South Korean bankruptcy proceeding, competing with banks, bondholders, and everyone else Hanjin owed money to, for a share of whatever assets were left. Freight rates on some routes spiked by as much as 50% in the aftermath as the market scrambled to absorb the sudden loss of capacity. But that rate spike did nothing to help agents who were still owed money for work already completed months earlier. The lesson isn't that Hanjin's agents were careless. It's that even representing one of the largest, most established shipping lines in the world provides no real protection against this industry's core structural risk. Scale and reputation reduce the odds of a client collapsing. They don't eliminate the exposure sitting in your disbursement accounts the moment it happens. How smaller agencies actually lose this money. Away from headline collapses like Hanjin, 3 ordinary patterns explain most agency losses at the small and mid-sized level. Pattern 1. Concentration in a single client or single trade route. An agency that builds its business around 1 or 2 shipping line relationships looks efficient and profitable right up until that client hits financial trouble, a route gets discontinued, or a larger competitor undercuts your contract at renewal time. Diversifying across multiple carriers and cargo types costs more to build and maintain, but it's the only real hedge against this industry's client concentration risk. Pattern 2. Underpricing disbursement handling to win business. New agencies competing for their first major contracts sometimes shave their agency fee to near nothing, assuming the real profit will come from volume over time. That strategy leaves almost no margin to absorb even a single client's payment delay, let alone an outright default, and can turn a genuinely busy agency into a cash flow disaster during any slow payment stretch. Pattern 3. Inadequate credit vetting of new clients. Because the entire disbursement model depends on trusting a shipping line to reimburse costs already paid out, agencies that skip real financial due diligence on new or smaller carriers chasing growth without checking creditworthiness are the ones most exposed when a marginal operator quietly runs out of cash. What you actually walk away with. Scenario 1. A small independent husbandry agency at a mid-sized port, handling perhaps 15 to 25 vessel calls a month across a handful of shipping line clients. Realistic annual revenue from agency fees alone lands in the $300,000 to $700,000 range, with net margins commonly in the 15 to 25% range once overhead and staffing are covered. Call it $50,000 to $175,000 in real annual profit, carrying genuine counterparty risk on every disbursement account outstanding at any given time. Scenario 2. You build toward liner agency status, securing an exclusive regional representation contract with a major shipping line. At this tier, recurring monthly retainers plus higher call volumes can push annual revenue past $1 million, with the stability of a long-term contract meaningfully reducing, though never eliminating, the client concentration risk that defines the smaller tiers. This is exactly the size and structure that companies like Inchcape and Wilhelmsen have spent decades consolidating around. So if you're chasing this business, remember the real rule of this industry. You're not just coordinating logistics. You're extending short-term credit to shipping companies you don't control in an industry with genuinely extreme volatility, and your protection against the next tangent isn't in your operations, it's in how carefully you choose, diversify, and vet the clients whose money you're fronting.